This right here is a kit that I completed not too long ago. It is a Light 462, and I painted it for the Atlantic coastline since the kit most closely matched that prototype. And this was made in the 1980s by DJH, which, for those of you who don't know, is a British manufacturer of steam engine kits. For a while, though, they were making some American models to try and get into our market, and this is one of them. And it's a pretty nice model overall, so I thought I'd give it a little review here. For a brief history, the Light 462 was built from 1919 to 1920, with the first 81 units being built by the USRA. 234 more were built by Alco and Baldwin, copying the USRA design, and 235 units total went to the Atlantic coastline. The other 80 went to other railroads such as the Baltimore and Ohio and Louisville and Nashville. These were used mainly for passenger service, but also served for freight and fast freight. And they were used all the way up through the end of the steam era, with the final one being retired in 1961. Like DJH's other kits, this is an all-metal model with cast parts made from a sort of pewter, which I believe is called Britannia. It has a low melting point, it's easy to cast and takes well to detail. And then the rest of it is made from finely etched brass, such as the tinder here, which has an almost completely etched brass body. And back when this was made, pretty much your only other choices for a Light 462 of this design were the metal kit from Bowser, which used a somewhat freelanced boiler by Carey, or the plastic model by Mahano, which was sold by AHM, Lifelike, and later IHC. So this kind of filled the gap in the middle of giving a higher quality, more finely detailed model without having to pay the premium brass price, although this was still a very expensive model at the time. And just for some close-up shots, you can see just how finely detailed these etched parts are, so they really gave you a very nice model in its day, nicer than what you would have gotten from the other manufacturers. Going along the length of the boiler, you can see that just about every single walkway and step has finely detailed tread cast right into it, and that has a very nice appearance about it. The cab is made from etched brass, and the thin walls give it a very fine scale appearance, especially for if you add window glass, which I haven't done at this point. Then the boiler back head as well as the roof are both made from finely detailed cast metal. As you go around the model, most of the details are separate parts, although some of them, such as the larger pipes, are cast directly into the boiler, but thanks to the process used for that, they still look almost like separate parts. Although most of the details are very nice, there are a couple that I think could have been better, such as the piping detail running along the side of the boiler there. That is all just a single piece instead of using separate wire and small brackets like you would have gotten with Bowser as well as the brass models. So it kind of cheapens the appearance a little bit. And as for the side rods, those are all high quality etched nickel silver parts instead of brass. So they look very good without any need for painting, and they work very smoothly too. At the front of the model, the pilot is very finely cast and looks very good. And the headlight is also a finely cast part, and it is not made to accommodate a light bulb, but since the metal is soft, it is easy to modify and add that to it later. Now the tinder, since that is a mostly etched metal body, they made most of the details separate pieces, and that helps a lot with the appearance. And like a lot of other kits, as well as brass models, there is no coal load in the tinder. Instead, they just made that an open bay so that the builder can add that later. Then at the back of the tinder, the ladder is also an etched piece which you fold into shape, and that looks very nice, I think. The reverse light is not made to accommodate a light bulb, so again it has to be drilled out and modified in order to add anything like that. And for the coupler, that's not provided, but they do make it so that you can fit a KD coupler box directly to it, which is helpful, although the position's a little bit low, so you need a coupler like this one where the head is raised. And flipping things over, you can see that this uses a sheet metal frame like most of DJH's other kits. So that's basically just two brass sides which have some parts in the middle to help hold it together. And then this one has a cover plate on it which Not all DJH kits have that, but this one was made so that you could remove the drive wheels without having to unscrew the wheels from the axles like on some of their other British models. The chassis of the Tinder has a cast metal underframe, which gives it a nice low center of gravity. The trucks are held in place with a single screw each, as you can see, and they have a self-leveling design with a screw in each side, so they have some ability to twist. And the springs holding them to the chassis help to maintain electrical contact. And you can see how the KD coupler box is held in place with the 2-screw design to make sure that it can't twist as it runs along. Now, to power the model, they included a Mishima can motor, which is a very, very high quality can motor. It runs very nicely, but it was actually kind of a poor choice for this model, this specific motor, because it just runs too slowly to drive the model at a realistic speed with the 28:1 gearing. It was only hitting about 40 scale miles per hour, and with higher speed gearing, it wouldn't have had the torque required to pull any sort of load behind it. So I decided to replace the motor with the same model of coreless one that I put into my Bowser 482 a while ago, and that one ended up being a perfect match for this, running at a much more realistic speed and having more than enough torque to pull whatever I put behind it. Now, for the assembly of the kit, it was good, but I would say the fit and finish wasn't quite as good as what I've seen in other DJH kits that I've built. In order to be more maybe accommodating to the American market, they made this a screw together design that was made to require little to no soldering, unlike their British kits, which have a lot of soldering involved in assembling the frame and other pieces. Now, in trying to make it so that everything just screws together, they actually ended up making it so some things, such as the cab, were a little more difficult to put together. So that took me, it actually took me a long time to get the screws for the cab inserted where they needed to be, along with the nuts to hold it together, and in the end, just to make it hold together better, I ended up soldering it anyway after the screws were holding it together. And for the frame, I just went ahead and relied on the screw together system that they provided. It worked fine, but again, it didn't have quite the fit or finish that I'm used to with their soldered together models. I also had some frustrations with putting the side rods together because the screws that they provided to fit to the front and rear drive wheels have such tiny and flat heads on them that I couldn't find a nut driver small enough or flat enough to even get those in. So the only way that I could assemble those was to use pliers, which I didn't really want to do, but I really didn't have another choice in this case. I just couldn't find a driver that would work properly with them. And as a result, I couldn't easily put them together and take them apart for making small adjustments. So it ended up not being quite as smooth of a runner as I would have hoped, although it is still a smooth runner. You'll see a little bit later that there are some little things about it that aren't quite as good as they could have been. Now, unfortunately, with my kit, I actually received a wrong package of detail parts, and since these are long out of production and it's basically impossible to get replacements for those, I ended up designing and printing a lot of things myself, such as the bell and the crossheads, so they're not a perfect match for this model, but the ones that I printed still turned out looking good, at least. Now, for getting on to the running quality, like I said, I changed the motor out for one that was faster and had more torque, so it was a better match for this steam engine. But other than that, the running quality is the same as what I was getting with the original Mishima motor. So it takes off nice and smooth. It's very quiet, and I don't know how well you can see it, but at low speeds there's a slight surging motion just because of the difficulties I had with getting the side rods fit together and adjusted. Once it's up to speed though, you really don't notice the surging. And it's nice and smooth overall. And getting up to higher speeds, there's really no more than a slight hum that comes from the model. The motor is connected to the gearbox using a piece of drive tubing. That's by design. That's what they provided. One thing about drive tubing is that it can be a little difficult to get it adjusted perfectly If it's off by even the tiniest bit, it can cause vibration of the gearbox, which contributes to noise by causing a little bit of rattling and additional humming and maybe growling. So if I got the drive tubing completely perfect in here, it may not even make that humming noise at all. But again, it's so quiet that it's really not a bother at all. I'm getting this up to its full speed at 12 volts. So with the motor that I put in, it's a top speed of 84 scale miles per hour. And with the other motor, it was about 40, 45, so way too slow for a 462, but with this motor, I'd say it's just about perfect. I'm taking it down to slow speed. It's not really steady enough that I could get a good measurement off of that, so well, at least with the 462, these weren't really made to be switching steam engines. So for the slow speed control to not be excellent, I don't consider that to be so much of a problem as it would with the smaller steam engine or switcher. Although I would have liked to see better low speed control if that were more of a possibility in this case. But it does at least operate smoothly. But it also just lost power, which is another little thing about the model. Like most other metal steam engine kits, the steam engine picks up power from one rail, the tender from the other. And in this one, they use a wireless drawbar to transfer power. The little walkway there that has a piece of plastic insulation on the bottom to prevent short circuits. And for the wireless system, that uses a spring pin to touch the pin that's on the tender to maintain electrical contact, but they used a piece of etched brass which doesn't really maintain spring tension, so sometimes that connection's a bit finicky, and that could use maybe a piece of phosphor or bronze wire or something else with a little more springiness to it to help maintain the electrical pickup as it runs along. I've noticed that the tender, once in a while, it has a tendency to derail. These self-leveling trucks, they work pretty well, but if you over-tighten the screws, then of course they're not going to have that self-leveling to them. And if the screws are left loose at all, then the axles can fall out. So it's a very fine adjustment. And you actually want to secure the screws once they're adjusted perfectly with a bit of glue to make sure that they won't back out over time. I've also noticed that the rear truck of the engine is a little bit finicky when it's backing over switches or sometimes backing into a curve. It doesn't always want to stay on the track, so that's another piece that can use a bit of adjustment to have better tracking. I've got it adjusted pretty well at this point, so it almost always stays on the track, but I still have a little more tuning to go with it. Now testing it out with a load hooked up, I've got just over 20 freight cars here behind it. And it has no problem at all taking off with this whole load. Thanks to the metal construction, it's got plenty of traction. Of course, the motor I put in, again, that increases the torque quite a bit over the original. Although with the original motor, it was still able to haul a load like this. It just wasn't fast at all. It's got more than enough traction to pull a realistic load, even going up a reasonable grade. So traction, pulling power, it's really no problem at all for this model. So that is the DJH HO Scale 462. Overall, this is a very good model. The detail is great, although there are some cast-on pipes and other parts which could have been separate. Those are easily filed off and replaced thanks to the boiler being made from a soft pewter material instead of the usual die cast that's used in the typical American kits. The brass parts, even though they made it a screw-together design, they solder well if you're willing to do that. And I think soldering does help with the overall construction of the model, making it stronger and cleaner. The quality of the model is definitely excellent thanks to the all-metal construction. It's well designed, as DJH usually does, although the design, I think, could have been better if they just went with their traditional solder together kits instead of trying to make this an all screw together design, because there were a few parts which didn't assemble as well as they could have. It would have been better if they just built things the way that they were used to doing. The parts are all very high quality. The brass solder as well, of course, like I mentioned before, and the pewter parts, they can also be soldered if you have a low temperature iron and solder to go with it. The running quality of the model, as long as it's assembled correctly and tuned properly, is excellent. It's extremely smooth. The motor was a bit slow, like I mentioned before. Replacing that brought it up to the speed required and gave it some extra torque. And the rest of the mechanical quality beyond that is really excellent. I really can't fault it. Assembly of the model, it's not the easiest, so this is a kit more for the moderate to advanced kit builder. So it's something where you want to have some skill already before you try to take this on. As long as you have some skill though, you can get a very, very nice model out of it. As for the value of the kit, a lot of times people who are selling these try to get a very high price out of them. But this one here, I don't think I would have bought it unless I got the really good deal that I did. Because at this point, there really are plenty of 462 models that are a better value and ready to run. And for most people, I would definitely recommend those over this one. But if you are someone like me who likes to build metal kits and has some experience, then it is a good model if you can find it for the right price. So in that case, I would recommend it. But for others, I would say look for one of the newer, high-quality, ready-to-run options that are available at this point.